March 1960, a woman was in labor, and during the labor she had severe trauma and things went terribly wrong. And when the baby was born, the baby wasn't breathing. And in the process, the woman was dying, and the room was full of panic. So attention went to the woman, and the priest was called, and the last rites were provided to the baby. And they finally got the woman stabilized. And a brand new doctor, resident, came in the room and saw the baby and found a very slight pulse and began working on the baby. And after a long time, no oxygen to the brain, the baby finally started to take it on and breathe. And then they got it stabilized, and for the next 6 weeks, the baby was in incubator, and the mom was recovering from a very traumatic experience in which she nearly died. During the process of leaving the hospital, the doctor said to the woman, "You realize that your child went without oxygen." And he said, "That's going to mean that there's going to be brain trauma and that we have no idea what that child's outcome is going to be. You just need to make the best of this and understand that there's programs and places for children like that, and you won't have to worry about it." So as they handed the baby off in the blanket, they said, just be happy with what you have, but don't have any high expectations for that child. That kid was me. That kid was me. And what that set up that day was a long, long history in the disability community of low expectations. If we can just get by, that's enough. That's enough. Because the general public really believes that disability is the worst thing that could ever happen to someone or happen to their family. My goodness, if disability came into my home, disability, the tragedy, that's what we think of, tragedy. But the real tragedy of disability is the discrimination and just the ignorance that we face after disability. The tragedy of disability takes place when everyone in the school knows that those kids go in that room. That's where they belong. The tragedy of disability takes place when in your mid-career your body starts to get old, and you are encouraged by your employer to go on workers' comp because you are no longer needed here. The tragedy of disability takes place when we turn to parents and we convince parents to put their children on nationwide TV in order to get pity and pennies out of our public. Please, please help the suffering. Why would we do that to parents? The tragedy of disability takes place when our ignorance about disability blows the door of human rights wide open. About 10 years ago, I was chosen to be part of a jury right downtown. And we heard a rape case. And for 2 hours, the prosecutor worked with the victim to explain what had happened to her and what the alleged victim across the room had done. And at the end of that 2-hour grilling, his defense attorney got up and he said, "Mrs. Jones, I only have a couple questions for you." He said, "First of all, when you were a teenager, is it not true that you were involved in an automobile accident in which you hit your head on the windshield?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Mrs. Jones, is it not true that because of that injury, you started having seizures?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Mrs. Jones, when you have a seizure, do you remember clearly what happened during those seizures?" And she said, "No." And he said, "For the jury, Mrs. Jones, when you have a seizure, you don't know what's going on." And she said, "Yes." And we broke for lunch. And at the end of lunch, the jury came back, and the prosecutor had requested that the case be dismissed because he did not feel he could convince a jury of her peers that she had been raped but may have just been having a seizure. This happened up the road. The prosecutor in that case is now a judge. So in 1990, I, along with 3,000 other advocates from across the country, attended the Americans with Disabilities Act signing at the White House. It was our day, our Independence Day. It's good that you clap, but that was 29 years ago. And ladies and gentlemen, we are not there. By any means of the imagination, we are not there. So we brought it home to this community. As the Ability Center celebrates our centennial anniversary next year, we are asking the rhetorical question, what would it take for the Toledo area to be the most disability-friendly community in the country? And then we ask, why not us? Why not do this? And some of the framework that sets up this question involves us understanding where we're at today and what needs to be adjusted. We have an unemployment rate or underemployment rate of almost 80% of the disability community does not work. Now, I would challenge you, most of you had no idea that was the case. 80% of folks with disabilities don't work and therefore are in poverty. We as a community must grab hold of that and wrestle it down. Because all of our thinking in the past was that those people go over there to do their work. They don't come here, they go over there. And I'll never forget the day driving around with my wife's grandmother in Lima, Ohio, and she freaking out about her granddaughter dating a cripple. Anyways, and we roll up, she goes, turn down this road, turn down this road. We roll up into this driveway, into a building, and she goes, that's where people like you work. And it was the shelter workshop. Because that was the mindset, was that people with disabilities have to go over there to work. And if we're gonna become the most disability-friendly community in the country, people with disabilities have to come to us and work. They have to be part of our community, part of the fabric of what we do. We also have to deal with housing. We have to understand that when people say they're disabled, it means that flight of stairs is their barrier to independence. And if they can't get in their house, they go to the nursing home. They go to the nursing home. Do you realize that about 15% of all nursing home residents are under 60? It's because they have a disability and they can't go home. We have to think about our housing stock in this community, and we have to get serious about living up to the idea that people are best when they're in their community with others. We have to grapple with our healthcare system. We have to understand that if you're in a wheelchair and you can't get on the darn examination table, that you're not getting equal health care. We have to understand that if a woman can't access the mammogram machine, she's not getting equal health care. We have to nail this, folks. We have to nail this because people are literally going untreated. Finally, we have to get a hold of the fact that if we really want to have a disability-friendly community, then we have to start early in our communications. when public projects are going on, we have to include everybody in the discussions. In the disability community, there's a phrase that says, nothing about us without us. And life is much better when you do nothing about us without us. So when we built Fifth Third Field, when we built Huntington Center, we were on the ground with the architects before a shovel ever went in the ground. And that's why Fifth Third Field is one of the most accessible fields in the league. Because what we explain to them in the wheelchair seating is when everybody stands up for a home run, the guy in the wheelchair still needs to see above their heads. So they did it. Nothing about us without us. It's plain and simple. We need to be part of the plan if we're going to have a most disability-friendly community in the country. You know, I have to tell you, when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, I was out traveling around the country talking to people about all the opportunity that was in front of us. And it meant flying a lot. You know, 3 or 4 times a month I was on a plane. Crippled guys do not do well in airports. Let me tell you, I am no O.J. Simpson. And when you change the gate on me, you wreck my life. So it never failed, you know. I was the guy wandering up, and they go, "Oh, you can go and be on standby." Standby's like hell. And I always had to be somewhere, you know, and next morning I had to be there. So I finally got it down. I stole one of those little pilot air wings. And they wear on their jacket. And I just walk around the gate here and go, "Excuse me, are you flying on my jet?" So it's all about us. It's all about what we do together. But we really need to have a gut check about where we are at in this thought process. In this room, where are we at? And I would challenge you that Target is a perfect example of a community gone wild. And that how can we get to a point where we are allowing our public transit agency to wither on the vine. To wither on the vine. Folks with disabilities, folks who are marginalized, folks that are seniors, millennials that want to do whatever. How do we let our transit authority wither on the vine? So really it's a gut check for all of us. Where are we going to stand when we go up for a vote to make Target better? What I can tell you is that when they shut down weekend service, 250 people did not go to church those Sundays. They did not go to family meals. Who are we as a community to let our transit system wither on the vine? Gut check. Are there folks with disabilities that work with you in your organization? How do you feel about that? Gut check. It's probably something we should think about. Gut check. Next week, 3 women with Down syndrome are going to be your next door neighbor. How do you feel about that? What's your initial reaction? Gut check. I'm telling you, for folks in this room, the question is in your hands. Because you got to know about the problem before you can fix the problem. But understanding where your mind's at about 3 women with disabilities being your next door neighbor is a good place to start the conversation. I don't know. We have much to do here. My gut check is, are there people in your church that are actively involved that have disabilities? Are there kids on your kids' ball team that have disabilities? Do you ever hang out with folks with disabilities? Just a gut check. What I do know is that at the end of the day, 1 in 5 individuals in this country and in this room will be a person with a disability. So if we go off and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're it. And unlike other minorities, disability is a minority that you're not born into and you don't volunteer to be a member. It's just one day. And then the question becomes, how would you want that one day to be? Gut check. I hate all this political correctness. Everybody's trying to be so politically correct. What's wrong with that phrase, handicapped? Handicap was born in the 1500s. Handicap was a law provided by the king that allowed disabled veterans of the war to beg for money on the streets with cap in hand. Handicap is cap in hand. We no longer want to be affiliated with having caps in hand. So yes, disability is preferred. So you say, Tim, you're talking about stuff that could have taken place a long time ago. Aren't we much better today? Aren't we much better today? And yesterday I would have said, yeah, we probably are. And then yesterday I went to lunch with a donor at Highland Meadows Country Club. And I was going to make a nice ask. And as we sat there, the entree came with soup. And when they set the soup down, I knew we were in trouble. Usually with soup, I ask the whole table to put on like raincoats. So the soup goes away and the chicken comes and we're eating and I cut my food with my fork. And I've survived quite handsomely for 59 years cutting my food with a fork. So I'm digging in, I'm having this conversation, and next thing I know, here comes our waitress. and she's got a fork in one hand and a knife in the other. And she goes, I see you're having trouble. I'm going to get your chicken. And I said, no, that's okay. I got it. And I turned thinking she would leave. And I turned back around and my chicken had cut up. Then she goes, there, and walked away. And as I turned back to my donor, she said, you told her that you had this okay. And I said to my donor, welcome to my world. Thank you.